We could get started. I'll just do my little introductory bit while other people join us. And that will keep things moving along a little bit. So I know some of you obviously know Chase, and that's great. Chase went to school at University of Georgia State University for a BFA. And then he went to the University of Colorado for an MFA. And I think graduation was around 2012, something like that.
Sounds right.
And then he launched himself into the world. We talked about the Brzezowski in Berlin, but many others, including Penland, places like that, where we all trying to get to after we leave graduate school, and sort of trying to make our way through all the different possibilities to keep things afloat. And that's one of the interesting things about Chase's experience, because he's been in a lot of these situations and tried out a lot of these things. I worked as an art handler, you know, in addition to trying to keep the work going in the studio. And then in 2015, he was invited to join us here at Alfred and was honored with the Turner Teaching Fellowship. So from 2015 to 2018, he was here teaching. And that's when I really got to know Chase. When he came for his Turner Teaching Fellow interview, it was really very dynamic, very exciting. And you know, when you turn in those colored pieces of paper, all the students pretty much turned in colored pieces of paper, says, "We want Chase." So that's how he arrived. He had a show in the museum called Hereafter, which was opened in 2017 in the fall. And there's a wonderful catalog that goes with that exhibition. We have copies of it here in the museum if you'd like to, you know, acquire one. Then after he left here, he went to teach at Richmond Commonwealth University. And you know, what I'm most excited about and most encouraged about is that at that point, he made a decision to take a big risk and become a full-time artist. And I celebrate his courage and conviction, because that's not easy to do. So how is he doing it? How is he surviving, you know, patching that determination to be a full-time studio artist with a gig here and a gig there? He's just accepted teaching at SUNY Purchase in the art school there, and will be teaching a couple of courses this coming semester in contemporary art and ceramic art. So these are more history-based classes. And recently, his work was picked up by the Ethan Cohen Gallery, which is a major gallery. As you all know, you've probably heard of Ethan Cohen. And so now you can see his work in an exhibition called Darkest Before Dawn, which is at the new Ethan Cohen complex in Beacon, in Dia Beacon. So if you're on your way to New York after Thanksgiving break and the crits, all of that we do, you could stop by. I think that show's on until the 20th or the 30th of January, maybe the 30th of January. And it stars, you know, a number of international artists and artists who work in a variety of media. So it's not specific to ceramic, but it is an important step in recognition of Chase's work by the art world. I invited him to guest curate the full capacity virtual reality exhibition, and that of course is why he's here to talk about that. I knew that if I began conversations with him, I would begin learning a lot about contemporary practice across the field, and also about artists that I was unaware of. So I decided, you know, to take a risk and try to do this exhibition. Unusual for the museum, but it's part of the mission of the museum to show, you know, in our exhibition cycle, works in other media. We, of course, you know, stick to collecting and archiving ceramic art, but our mission statement states that we will be showing work in other media. So this is certainly in other media or in another media. And it's fascinating. I learned so much. in the process working with Chase and also working with the folks at Primal Screen and building these various virtual reality installations that you can see on the museum's website. So obviously I would ask him to come and talk with you about it and how it came together and what his insights around the exhibition are. And also I asked him to begin to discuss with you or just open up the Pandora's box about the rise of the curator. And today, the art world is one of the major gatekeepers, if not the most major gatekeeper in the art world, are probably the curators. And perhaps we will begin to do some Zoom talks and bring some curators into the picture from various parts of the landscape, art field and ceramic art field. So in addition to visiting artists and art practice, also look at that world of the curator. And interestingly, of course, this is not the first show that Chase has curated. And so he has some points of view about that whole world of the curator from an artist's point of view, sort of the artist as curator. So that's part of the story. I could go on and talk about him a lot. But anyway, just welcome Kelcy Chase Folsom.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for organizing this, Bill and Wayne. And thank you. I first want to thank the artists, Dedrick Brackens and Jeannie Quinn and Lisa Marie Barber and Coco Clockner and Ryan Brzezowski, who did the painting. And then also the folks at Primal Screen, including the executive producer, Fatima Abdullah. And then Alfred University, and then of course you, Wayne, for believing in my vision and being my rock. I feel like every week since March, and so thank you all for coming today. So like Wayne said, I actually am going to organize this talk first about this lecture really is an educational lecture, obviously, about the exhibition, but also I'm thinking about Alfred University, obviously, as an educational institution. And so I want to talk about, what is curation and what is curation for me as an artist? Why do I curate? And then talk to you about kind of how full capacity came together. And I'll actually introduce the artists as well and show you a few examples of their work, a little bit kind of how I found them, and then also just some images, some screenshots from the exhibition. So first I just want to talk about curation as an artist. If you know anything about my work, you know that I have a sincere material curiosity, and that is a huge driving component to my work. And so, with curation, the material is ideas. And so I'm able to work with other artists' ideas or ideas that I see in their work, and then try to create an exhibition that's like this umbrella idea that those kind of fit in. And it also, at the end of the day, it also allows me to not make the same mistakes that curators have made when I have been in a show or curated into a show. I think it usually comes down to money. A lot of times, artists should get paid for their time, and that's something that I believe in wholeheartedly. And I think that a lot of times we get really excited as artists just to be in any show when we're invited, because it's just, it's a nice ego stroke, and at the same time, you get to show your work and you get to kind of build an exhibition with other artists. But I think if their intent is just exposure and there's no intent to sell the work, or, how am I compensated for the time, the ideas, the materials, the shipping, all of that. And so I think about, the difference between curating for a gallery versus curating for a museum. Curating for a museum, that's through an educational institution. And I think that where that starts is, if you think about curating for a gallery, you know, there's a lot at stake. That work's got to pay the bills. That work has to keep the doors open, if you will. And I've done that, which is, you know, you have a very uncomfortable conversation sometimes with a gallery owner, because, you know, I want to include a, you know, performance piece that we got to pay the artist or the performers for that piece, even though it's not necessarily something to sell. So there's that conversation. But then I think about, you know, on the other side of that is like this exhibition, right? Or curating for a museum at an educational institution. It's kind of the best because you can be the most experimental. You can you really are able to dream as big as you want. Well, to a certain extent, depending on the budget. So, I mean, you know, and I think there's always a budget depending on you know, the place that, or the institution that you're working with. But I will say that, like, as in terms of gatekeepers, Wayne kind of mentioned that, and I think that curators are one of the many gatekeepers in the art world. And you know, when I was in graduate school, I had the benefit of meeting Carmen Winant in her studio at the University of Colorado Boulder. And if you're not familiar with her work, she just had an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She's also the Dean of Skowhegan, and she's been writing about art as a critic for quite some time. And I've actually had the pleasure of her writing about my work as well. And she said to me, artists can do everything. And I think that that's something that I've always kind of held really close to me as an artist. And she said that in terms of like, we can curate, we can write, we can be the critic, we can also be the collector, you know, we can do all of those things. And so that, and again, that was a huge turning point for me. And so I think that, you know, the question of like, why do I curate? I also think that it gives me the opportunity to work and speak with artists that I love. I think that, you know, and by love, I mean, you know, not necessarily in a taste sense, but thinking about work that I love that challenges me. And I think that, you know, with these artists that are in the show, they definitely do that. And when you curate, you just get the opportunity to be able to talk to them, to be able to, you know, you get insight into their life, and you can ask them most any question that you have, because there is this relationship. You are kind of, you know, the face of their work. You're the one that's standing up for their work. And so they want to trust you. And I think that, and vice versa. So, and I've like, I've absolutely loved that with this exhibition. So I want to start kind of at the beginning of Full Capacity and how that all kind of came to fruition. I think we can all contest in terms of COVID. Many artists lost their studios. They, you know, they felt like they lost their creative life in a lot of ways. You know, I think you had to learn how to be creative. And I think that that was a very difficult time for me in March as well. I've moved 3 times during the pandemic. And so that's been really, really difficult. I think that, you know, not having a studio and kind of being this nomad for the past 6 months really it forced me to be creative in a different way. And I think that, you know, when Wayne asked me if I would be interested in curating a show, I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I can do this. Like I don't need, you know, I don't need a studio. I actually can do this from my kitchen table. I think about the kitchen table because Felix Gonzalez Torres said that, you know, the only thing we need as artists is a kitchen table. And so, but that is like where I'm sitting right now. That's where I've been doing most of this curation. Also just going on long walks and talking to Wayne about, you know, what could be possible, and thinking about, I was dreaming really big when we started this. So it was just kind of, you know, having to hash out what I believe to be possible and then what is actually possible. When he mentioned curating a VR exhibition, I said to myself, I was like, okay, well, I've clearly never done that before, and that made me excited. But then I started thinking about VR exhibitions that I had seen, and also like kind of the problems that I saw in the execution of those exhibitions. Also the things that I loved. One of my favorite VR exhibitions to date is an exhibition at the New Museum. It was in 2016. It was an all VR show. You can download the app and view all of those. It was a very queer exhibition. Again, one of my favorites. But the thing that I was thinking about with this show is like, I really wanted to invite artists working with mostly sculpture, but I didn't want to deny artists the decency of time. And I think for sculptors, it's also physical space. You know, I didn't want I didn't want artists to create objects and then scan those objects and then that be a part of the thing, because I think at the end of the day, it's just not going to hold up. I think artists are, you know, we want to see the real thing. I decided, I was like, you know, this will be a wonderful opportunity for artists to work with material that they've never worked with or considered. And I wanted it to be kind of a similar playing field as this curation of this project was for me. And that proved to be very difficult. And that was a huge component in curating the show, was I wanted to find artists that had never used VR before. I didn't want them to know how it worked. I didn't want them to, and the reason is because when you don't know how something works, you can dream about how it can work, and you can think about all the possibilities and potential in something. And then of course, when you get to it and you actually do it, that's when, you know, all the questions start popping up. And so I really wanted to provide a space for folks to dream during this time period. Also, you know, the exhibition starts with a painting, and I think just to kind of give you insight into how I landed on a painting, you know, for a ceramic art museum. You know, I think that I was teaching online as well, like most people, and I couldn't help but like think of all my friends and family and colleagues and students as kind of like these talking paintings. And because it was this flat space, it was this like, and I was present during those conversations. I don't want you to think that, but like at the end of the day, you get off and you're like, well, I just talked to these people, but I didn't talk to them. I didn't see them. I couldn't smell them. I couldn't shake their hand. I couldn't have all these normal interactions that I would have with a human. And then I started thinking what painting does, and like how painting is this like fictitious space that is two-dimensional, that is set up by an artist, that is everything who they are as a human. And I thought, you know, in a time when folks are trying to escape, well, painting just seems like the wonderful place for them to be right now, you know, to allow themselves to fall into that space. And, you know, just my own experience with paintings, I always imagine what's beyond the painting when I look at paintings. I think about how they expand, how they contract, how they introduce me to a world that I probably wouldn't have imagined or seen. And if it doesn't do that, I probably don't like the painting. You know, I really enjoy that moment. And that's also a really good exercise too, just asking what is beyond the painting. But I think it's also simultaneously painting and art, if it's doing a good job, I think it's asking questions about who you are. And I think it's asking you to see yourself. Kathy Wilkes, she's probably she is one of my favorite artists. It's Cathy, if you're looking her up. She says that that's what art's to do. She actually says that you're looking for yourself when you look at a work of art, and it should talk back, you know. And so that was kind of how I started thinking about this exhibition. And the idea was that I would invite, I think Wayne, I think we had like 6 or 7 I wanted to invite. But anyway, you know, you start, you know, the budgetary constraints happen. But I wanted to invite artists to look at a painting and just ask the question, what do you see? Like, what do you see beyond that space? And I think that we're asking this question a lot when we see each other via Zoom, or when we see each other in this digital space. It's an empathetic response. It's like, well, you know, how do you feel? What do you think? What do you see? And the painting could become this kind of constant idea for all the artists. And then another, you know, piece to the exhibition is that I really didn't want artists to communicate with the designers initially. I wanted them to just write a description through verbal language, write a description of what they saw, what world, describe the world in which they see beyond the painting, and then provide sketches, paintings, drawings, collage, anything to kind of help the designers at Primal Screen create this world, this experience. And you know, one of the main reasons why I wanted that kind of caveat is I wanted them to have that moment when, for especially ceramic folk, like when you put something in the kiln and then you wake up the next day or the days after or weeks after, and then you go and you look at it, because you know that it's probably not exactly what you wanted when you put it in that kiln. And I was thinking so much about that wonderful element of surprise, and how could I have VR also kind of operate in that element of surprise. So before the artists even got to talk to the designers face to face via, you know, Zoom, they already had the space built out. They already had the piece kind of ready based on the designs and description that were provided by the artists. And I thought that was just such a lovely moment, just as the curator, to witness that moment, that their facial reaction to, like. And, you know, it's also really scary too, because they don't like it. We just, you know, we just invested a lot of time in that space through their description. But it was so exciting to be with them through that. So then I want to talk a little bit about, you know, the painting, just going back for a moment, thinking about, like, why did I choose that painting? I think that a lot of artists were really thrown when they saw this painting by Ryan Brzezowski. And I didn't want a painting that pointed to like a specific place. I didn't want a cityscape. I didn't want a landscape, anything that had like a familiar building, and something that could be infinite, timeless, and I think above all, hopeful. I really didn't want an exhibition that, you know, that was saddening. I mean, I think we were all kind of experiencing this kind of darkness, and I wanted a place that people could, you know, that they could fall into and enjoy. And I think, you know, whether it's, I wasn't exactly looking for a theme park, but I was looking for something that was that you could experience in your home, that would take you to a place that you would actually enjoy and that you could return to when you wanted to. So Ryan Brzezowski's painting, Shifted Flowers, you know, that was painted back in January, and it was new, it was digital, it was mechanical, and mostly it reminded me of what I think I see rather than what I actually see. And that was something that was really important, this kind of, this real versus, you know, the virtual, and really asking the questions of like what VR does. So I contacted Ryan, I secured the painting, that was exciting. And so now I was like, okay, who is going to build this? And this is a huge, huge turning point, I think, in terms of this exhibition, is the folks that you're working around. And I say this to my students every single semester when I teach, is like, look at the people around you, get their phone number, get their home mailing address, do something, but those are going to be the people that you're going to need for the rest of your career. And I do believe that it has happened so many times in my career thus far. But I bring that up because my friend Fatima Abdullah, we lived together for many years in undergrad and after, and with her husband. Well, they weren't married at the time, but you know, he's a senior producer of Archer for Cartoon Network. And then she is the executive producer of Primal Screen. So when I contacted her, I was like, hey, I have this really cool idea. And, you know, and I had to pitch this idea to her and her team to take on this, this project. And she was so excited. And, you know, I think we would have made it happen at some point, Wayne. You know, I think we would have figured something out. But Primal Screen is really good at what they do, and they are an animation studio. They do everything, including VR. So just to give you a little insight into that, I proposed an app-based web experience, I proposed an app-based experience. And in terms of that, meaning that you were gonna have to download an app and then you could go to the show. And really, you know, I didn't realize this, but, you know, the app-based, you know, experiences are dwindling. It's changing rapidly. And really web-based in terms of this exhibition. And by the way, I learned all of this through curation. Like, I didn't know any of this information going into it. Fatima was just having to tell me, you know, here's your choices, you know, choose wisely. And so the web-based, you know, web-based meaning it just has a URL, we can go there whenever we want. That really is the most secure in terms of the future of this project. This project, because it is a VR exhibition, I want it to exist forever and have the potential to exist forever. And so that was kind of how all that connection happened. We went with the web-based, and then now it was time to choose the artist. And so now I want to talk about that. Like, how did I find them? How did I choose them? And that was really difficult to do. I think I made a laundry list of people that I was really interested in and their work. And really one of the main things was world building. I kept thinking about what they were going to have to do for this. And I was like, well, I really want them to be able to create a virtual space and essentially like an installation, you know, a all-encompassing installation. We know that from, not Italo Calvino, he did The Man Who Flew into Space from His Apartment, Ilya Kabakov. So, you know, I wanted to do this total installation component, and that's what VR is. And I needed those artists to come with me. Also going back to what I said earlier regarding, you know, I didn't want artists to be able to do VR. I didn't want to know anything about it. Well, you can't exactly ask an artist if they know VR, and when they say yes, you say, I'm sorry. You know, you don't want that. You don't want to say that to them. So I had to do a lot of research and trying to figure out if these people knew that, because I really wanted them to come in to this completely blind to that space. And then, you know, like I said earlier too, it wasn't really a question of taste. I really wanted something. I wanted artists that challenged me. Their work challenged me, and and then also, again, going back to world building, like, can they do that? Is that something that would be interesting to them? Is that something that they kind of do, but maybe haven't quite done like a really, really like massive installation? You know, really thinking about how that scale shift could work in their, and benefit them in that way. And then finally, you know, diverse voices. I was thinking so much about, I mean, obviously identity politics, how can you not? But then I also want to add this other kind of component, which is just generational diversity. I really wanted a group of artists that were, you know, of various ages. I didn't want, to be honest, I didn't want people who were my age. I didn't want all mid-30s artists, or even people that I really know that well. So in order to kind of talk about these folks, I'm going to transition into a quick little PowerPoint where I can show you images of their work and talk briefly about their work, and then also their work in the show. So I'm going to screen share right now. Okay, can you guys see that? Yes?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so that's the painting, by the way, obviously, by Ryan Brzezowski. Okay, so we're going to start with Lisa Marie Barber. And Lisa Marie, again, going back to world building, Lisa Marie Barber is very much committed to a narrative, and I would say non-linear, obviously, as well. But she builds, and as she's building, she's kind of making up the form and making up the story. It's not built, you know, they're built separately, but they're built and they're sequentially built. So she's moving from one space to the other throughout each piece. Here's another. So when I was working with Lisa with this project, by the way, probably one of the most enthusiastic people I've met, well, I guess over the phone. But she talks a lot about how she doesn't draw before she begins a piece. And rather, for her world, she wanted to collage a garden using drawings and flowers and maybe a few sculptures. She was like super excited about also seeing her work in a virtual space, which I really loved. I love that she was just so open to the fact that she was like, oh, I don't, you know, even if it doesn't look the same, I'm really open to experimenting with what VR has to offer. And then she also does, this is actually one of her newest works. She quilts and collages her drawings onto fabric using ink and screen printing. I really love this because I feel like she is so good at the iteration, right? Iteration after iteration after iteration. And like learning more about the worlds that she builds as she builds them. So for her work in full capacity, she wanted, you know, she wanted the designers to make it rain glitter, which was a huge difficulty for them. We kept trying these different particle sizes and nothing quite worked until the very end. She referred to Moulin, she actually referred to a lot of cinema, Moulin Rouge, Wizard of Oz, Pixar's Coco, and Book of Life. But the most important part for her at the end of this was really, she really wanted to make people smile. And she was really interested in like, how do you do that with objects? How do you, like, what do people look for when they smile? Another component to this is the flower on the left-hand side, the three-dimensional plastic flower. That was another huge project for the VR team, was building this flower from scratch. We really wanted to figure out a way to make these flowers, you know, kind of make you do this double take with it, you know, where you think that it's a drawing, or you think that it's like this this maybe real flower, but it has this like kind of artificial flavor to it. The next artist is Dedrick Brackens. And actually, you know, I will say I met Dedrick Brackens in Richmond while I was a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. We met briefly and I immediately loved his work. And I love his translation of this painting where he actually kind of goes through the daisies and goes underneath the ground, the current underneath the ground, and actually wrote a poem for his description and included a few drawings, of course. But he wrote a poem titled They Have Grown Gills that's being read aloud in his piece. And he dedicated this poem to Carl Baker, Stephen Booker, and Anthony Freeman. And if you're not familiar, these are murders that happened on Juneteenth celebration in 1981, where these three young men ranging 18 to 19 years old who were arrested for possession of marijuana on a bridge. It was about 5,000 cars on this bridge at the celebration in Mexia, Texas. And the officer couldn't get the boys to a patrol car to go across the bridge. So he handcuffed them without life jackets and put them in a boat to go to the patrol car on the other side. And the boat capsized and all the boys drowned. And so he wrote this poem to these three young men, and it's such a beautiful poem. And I believe it is in the museum, so you can actually read that. And that's one of the things that I love about Dedrick Brackens' work is there's always this underlying empathetic space that he accesses in his work, and so beautifully, Dedrick, you know, he doesn't really work with clay. And again, I said that at the beginning, I wasn't really interested in finding artists that necessarily work with clay, but artists that are interested in world building. And I think he does, you know, I think he does a beautiful job of that. And the next artist is Coco Clockner. And I actually, Coco Clockner is very young. They went to VCU for graduate school for sculpture, but this is an image from their MFA thesis show. I was thinking a lot about the aesthetics of this artist. It was just so completely different and so bizarre. Every time I look at Coco's work, I feel like I'm transplanted into this new way of thinking, and I'm trying to figure out like that narrative, if there even is one. I think their materiality. I feel like they make me do this whenever I look at their work. They make me try to feel what it feels like to be in that thing. Again, like kind of like my response to a painting. But when I asked Coco about this, they were so delighted to participate, because it was just something that was out of their wheelhouse. It was something that, you know, the way that they work is they're very decisive in the material they choose and the objects they make. And so especially with this project, their description was so direct and so it was so like it was as if like they had painted the image on a page. It was so vivid reading it. And so for this one, they kind of created this world, this planet that seems so familiar, and yet the experience, again, with the two moons in the background, kind of referencing the painting and the two daisies, it feels as if we understand everything and then simultaneously nothing at all. Like it, and I really, really love that about their work. I think they do that beautifully in their sculpture as well. And this was actually really cool. Just a side note, when we were working with the VR designers, Coco, they had actually drawn a map. The designers drew a map using the description that using the description they provided. And when we showed Coco the space, they like lit up. They were like, oh my gosh, like, you know, my words worked. You know, that moment where the description, the idea, everything just seemed to just fall into place. And actually I would say that was not like the other ones. I think this one was very, in particular, very precise. And then lastly, I have Jeannie Quinn. And actually, Jeannie Quinn, you know, wondering like how I know their work. Well, Jeannie Quinn teaches at the University of Colorado Boulder. But it's something that I think about in Jeannie's work is symmetry. It's something that she talks about a lot in her work. And in her description, she talks about the duality of painting, the digital versus the analog, and the real versus imagined. And I think that Jeannie's material language is so sophisticated, where she uses the material as a story. It's a huge part of her work. For hers, in her description, Jeannie talks. She talks about these objects in the piece as if they're objects in her home, actually, and they were described, and then also through sketches, the VR designers recreated them. But she talks about how she chose these objects based on kind of the idea that, you know, it's objects she owns, but it's objects that she would have made, like they're like artworks within themselves. And I found that so interesting, because I think as artists, we do that all the time, where you see a work of art and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that was my idea. Or no, I saw that thing, you know, I made that thing and then I saw it later, and you're like, wait a minute, they copy me. And so I think that there's that moment, but I think more importantly, when we have those moments, which we all do as artists, it's got to be an empathetic space, because, like, you know, we all have a brain. You know, we have the ability to create. We have eyes. We have the ability to create these spaces and these objects. And so, of course, you are going to see something similar. Of course, it just makes us human. And that was a huge part of Jeannie's piece. And then another thing that Jeannie said, that she couldn't help but think about her pregnancy. She had a child about 7 years ago, but she talked about how there's one life inside another life, and how this perspective that she created was kind of like this, like thinking through like two lives, right? And I was thinking so much about how that related to the experience of COVID, how we knew of the life that we had before and the life that we were leading now. Let me escape out of that. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. And so that brings me to the end of my lecture. I would like to open it up for questions, because I know you probably have them. Yeah, Wayne? Sorry. I was like, how do you want to do this? Thank you guys so much. I know I kind of ended abruptly there, but yeah, please go and look at it, enjoy it, visit it often.
I think that's all part of it, you know, it's like, like any other work of art. You have the opportunity to see it over and over again. So, you know, and spend more time. I've looked at it a lot for obvious reasons, but I always find something else. And so that's kind of a standard, you know, notion about any work of art. If you come back to it, and of course, you know, in the interim, you change. Something happens in your life, something else takes place. You see some other work of art. You watch a movie, you do something else, and then you come back and you look at this again, you say, oh, I didn't see that before. And also, I think it's fascinating, this idea of yours that you would ask artists who had a practice, you know, who were artists, they had identified with the term, but they didn't know anything about what they were setting out to do. And that you know, were giving a support to a notion that, you know, as an artist, whatever ilk you happen to come from, whether it's ceramics or, you know, mixed media sculpture or performance or something else, there's always that opportunity to reach and do something else, to open that door and to walk through. And I think that's an important aspect of, particularly in my experience, you know, over what, 47 years of teaching at Alfred in the ceramics program, you know, that this kind of media specific orientation and this kind of audience that seems to be media specific. And then our credential is sort of media specific. And, you know, clearly more and more, you know, ceramic artists are artists like artists everywhere. They have particular orientation to materials and ideas and passions for processes. But all of those things can be translated through their experience into other endeavors. So not that you need to do that, but also why wouldn't you if you had the opportunity? And I think you gave an opportunity to 4 artists who had never thought about that possibility. So it'd be interesting to see, you know, in 4 years or 3 years, to come back to them and say, you know, has anything changed about the way you think about your work, or anything changed about how you would take a risk, you know, and do something that you thought you would never do or that you were not capable of doing? So that kind of empowerment that you offered also was important. And coming from, you know, the fact that you have a lot of experience and you've seen a lot of work and you know a lot of work and you appreciate a lot of work, and that you have an eye that looks at ceramics also through the lens of all the other arts, all the other contemporary art forms. And I think that's very important sometimes, you know, because you have both of those pieces, that sense of, you know, the deep experience in ceramic, and also this sense of openness and interest and curiosity about this broader world. You know, earlier my question was also about just this idea of the curator in, you know, the contemporary world of art and the experience of art. Because it seems today, you know, perhaps I'm mistaken, but I think one could study to be a curator to a degree without having a background in a particular scholarship in the arts, without having a history in the way that Megan Jones has this brilliant and wonderful history in Japanese ceramic, which opens a lot of doors in conversation, but she's a really scholar. Hi, Megan. I'm talking about you, sorry. But, and curators who—
Here, thank you, I heard my name.
curators who come from the art world as artists and have opportunities. But today we're experiencing curators who just are studying primarily to be curators. And that the curator has become a major gatekeeper in the field of the arts, and ceramics as otherwise. So, you know, we all meet as gatekeepers. Maybe they, first of all, are the jury that lets you into graduate school. You know, maybe they're the residency people that let you get out of graduate school and have your first studio somewhere else. But eventually, there could be a gallery. Certainly in ceramics, the galleries have almost totally disappeared. But in the larger scene, it seems to be that the curator is become more a name in and of themselves, in a sense, regardless of, in a way, of the art that they happen to be curating. And I don't know whether you agree with that, but my question sort of spins around that somehow, you know, what you think about it, how you think about it.
Well, I think that, I think in terms of like gatekeeping, actually, that word, it always makes me like, I'm like, oh, that's a really big responsibility. You know, that's a lot of work. But I think one of the things too is that, like, you know, the exciting part about that I think is different than just being a curator as a career path, or, you know, rather than like obviously like my career path, which is just as like, you know, artist as curator, writer, you know, I don't, you know, poet, whatever. So it's like, you know, when I start thinking about that, you know, I'm able to like access people's practices, where they live, what they do, like, you know, communities that like maybe I want to be a part of, maybe I don't because they told me they had a really bad experience. But I think that like, in terms of in being a curator as an artist, you're able to kind of share a lot of you're able to share your ideas with people who are like really going to get on board. I felt like with all these artists that I met through this experience and other experiences, it just it connects you to communities that you otherwise wouldn't have connections to, you know, or you wouldn't be connected to. And that was a huge part. But also too, like, it's really fun to work with other people's ideas, you know, like their work, you know, not, and wanting to have a show that perhaps, you know, like many ideas, I think as artists, we have to choose. We have to choose those ideas that we move forward with. And I think that curation, actually, you know, I have a lot of ideas for exhibitions, and I just don't know who's going to be in them, and I don't know when they're going to happen. But I think that I do believe in, this sounds a little hippy dippy, but I do believe in like the universe does kind of provide, and it does kind of, you know, it's so wonderful that I met Dedrick when I did. It was so wonderful that I, you know, knew Jeannie when I did. Because when we started thinking about these projects, it was just, when we started thinking about this project, I was like, oh, those are the people that I would love to see together. I would love for them to be in a room together, have a conversation together. So it's experimental, but I'm sorry, I keep seeing all these questions pop up.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, how do you want to field them? You know, Katie Freed is in graduate school now, first year, and she has a similar question to Jonathan Hopp, who's the professor. But given that hierarchy, maybe I think we should ask Katie to ask her question, because they're sort of similar to Jonathan's. Katie, are you there?
Yeah, sure. Hi.
Hi.
Hey, Kelsey.
Who's that in the background?
Sorry?
You got a friend in the background.
Oh,
Hi.
yeah, this is my partner. He also wanted to watch.
Nice to see you. I don't ever get to meet everybody. I need to, you know, so it's nice to see you. Go ahead, Katie.
Sure. So I was interested to hear how the setting for this exhibition has sort of like widened or narrowed or otherwise, in your experience, changed the discourse around the work compared to a white cube experience.
Compared to what?
A white cube.
A white cube experience. So that's your question, Chase. Deal.
So you know what? Something that's really funny is I was actually excited about doing this because it was totally removing the white cube. So I thought, but then when I started talking to the VR designers, I was like, okay, just put this in layman's terms. Just like, how does this work? And they're like, well, first we make a box. And I was like, no, you know, like that's seriously what you see. And so, and actually I kind of I'll talk a little bit about that process too, but essentially they make, if you think about a white cube and then you think about like wallpaper, but the wallpaper is just image, right? And then inside that space, and it's kind of like a movie set too. You can think about it like that. They they literally move lights inside that space digitally. And so it is not different than the white cube. But what I think is really interesting is you don't know that you're there. I think that is one of the coolest parts about VR is that, like, yes, I'm telling you right now, yes, you're standing in the same size room with every single space that you're in. You just don't know it. So the way that they create those spaces is it's the same exact amount of, like, you know, when we were budgeting for this, that was a huge part. I wanted you to be able to walk around, but then I found out if you walked around, it was going to cost us $150,000. You know, so there, you know, it turned into a video game. Actually, if you play video games like Apex, it's the same thing. It's like literally building out that space. And so, you know, this exhibition allowed us to, like, it kept going back and forth. I had to be very creative and very strategic in how I used my words with the designers and the producer and the artists, right? You never want to tell artists, well, we can't do that. You don't want to say that. You know, you want to say, no, we can do that. And so it really was trying to find a middle ground with the designers, because I don't know how long it takes to do things like that. You know, I can tell you how long it takes to make a pinch pot. You know, it's pretty quick, but I don't, you know, in terms of like how to build out a space, it takes days. I mean, the turnaround time just to make glitter, like make it rain glitter, that was like a week and a half. And then it comes back and I was like, those particles are too big. It's like hailing that stuff. We want, you know, so it started actually, it didn't allow us to see the space. So, yeah, but I guess to further answer your question, I think it's really cool that while you know, you probably have read The White Cube, or you've seen the book The White Cube, and so I think it's really cool that you don't know that you're in that space, and so in terms of like. I think it's kind of that it's doing that in terms of it's imagining the space that's not the white cube in a way that I really love. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah. If there was,
Go ahead.
oh, I was gonna a follow-up question. That was like my question and beyond. But another sort of aspect that I was interested in is like part of the white cube is physically bringing people together to speak about the work. And I was wondering about how you navigated that with social distancing and the entire thing being in a virtual realm.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty anticlimactic, I think, too, because like when we had the opening, it was like, boop, you know, like it's now live, you know, and the artists are, that was like pretty challenging because everybody had worked so hard, you know, and really trying to trying to look at a screen as much as you can look at a screen, you know, like, I mean, that's really how we were operating. And I guess is your question also kind of just talking about community that comes with, yeah. You know, the artists, you know, we never really got together as a group, you know, to talk about this exhibition. They all, you know, obviously got, you know, each other. I gave them all their contacts and things like that. But when we were talking with designers, you're on the clock, you know, you're paying for that time, like every minute. And so that was something that was also very difficult to navigate, because you're like, okay, we have Dedrick, who is in LA, and all the designers live in Atlanta. you know, and so they're operating on completely different time zones, and we're having to navigate those schedules, which all is really boring chatter to talk about. But if you think about how like that kind of intersected community, you know what I mean, that really it's like we actually had a moment where like one of the artists actually didn't do the time zone change, and so we're all just sitting there waiting for them, and so and then they didn't show up, and so it's those moments where you, I don't know, like it was like frustrating, but it also was like really like beautiful to see, I don't know, people still living, still being human, still like doing their thing. The designers, I will say, I got like a private message from one of the designers. Like he was like, this has been amazing. He was like, we don't ever get to do things like this. He was like, we normally work with a company that gives us a brand, right? And then they have someone who's animated for them or created a storyboard for them, really all the pieces. And they're like, okay, Primal Screen, put this together. There's really no creative process for them. It's just kind of following suit, right? Like this is what I do. I build this thing and then it becomes this thing. But for this, you know, it really allowed those designers to like flex their creativity and to be artists and to be designers are the same thing, you know, to be able to have that moment. I think that to me was like the more community aspect of it, was like being able to kind of have and I think that's also why Primal Screen wanted to do it, you know. They really, and also Fatima, you know, what you guys saw, what you got to see in terms of this exhibition, it's about an $80,000 project. But because Primal Screen wanted to do it, it was allowing them to kind of flex things they had never done before. They had never done a web-based experience like this ever for a museum. So that was an opportunity for them, and we got a really wonderful discounted rate. So, and so, you know, that's also really cool too.
Yeah, Katie, I don't know whether this is part of your question, but I had a fantasy, you know, during this time of being able to have an opening of a virtual reality show where everybody brought their phones. Everybody has an iPhone, right? But also, you know, a big screen with all the people Zooming, and we're in the gallery, and we have refreshments and all the things we normally have at the opening, but we're sharing it on multi-levels. You know, we're sharing it in the real-time experience, and the real sort of, we're all in the room with it, we've got our phones, and we're saying, hey, look at this, look at that. And then we're also exploring it by Zoom because we have this other audience who are, you know, connecting and at the opening from wherever they were. I just did one of these projects where there were almost 100 people from 60 countries around the world who were on a Zoom. Well, we never even thought of doing that before. And there was something quite wonderful about that part of it. So, you know, what I envisioned, you know, was like a combination of this kind of thing at the old traditional opening as a way of expanding that notion of what we're thinking about as community. But I don't know whether that's really exactly what you were asking. But your question was similar to Jonathan. Jonathan, are you still there? Did he check out? Because his question read in a similar way. He just asked about thoughts, that it raised these thoughts as to museum and exhibition. You know, what is a museum? What is an exhibition? And we think of a museum as that box, maybe. And then the exhibition as this thing that goes on in that box.
I think that Wayne, just in terms of, you know, because you guys have all seen the description that are at the museum, you know, just to add to that component, like that's something that I didn't want anyone to, you know, that I didn't want to share with you all during this this talk. I didn't want that to be something that you can see online. I really wanted the description and those things to remain as an in-person experience, as like another component to this show. That it wouldn't be this, it would, you know, like I love the digital realm, but I wanted to have something kind of sacred for the show that you could only experience in person at Alfred in that collection forever, you know. And so those things won't be shared. And I think that is another kind of component to the exhibition that is very much a museum experience, or very much a gallery experience. Yeah.
Anybody else with a question? Okay, I guess.
Can I ask another one?
I was hoping you'd show up because I wanted to give Katie a chance to speak up, but your question is similar to hers.
Yeah. That's good. I kind of wonder do you think this would happen without COVID? Like, would this even be on the table without COVID?
You know, no. I mean, I would love to be like, yes, of course, I love VR. But I don't know anything about VR. I mean, I still know, I know a little bit, but I think that's why I love the project so much. You know, like, I really love materials. I really love things that I don't understand. And I think that this piece, you know, in terms of COVID, like that element, that's really what that kind of happened. And I think that I also find that really beautiful though, too, that, you know, out of this kind of darkness is this space that, you know, or this idea, that can give rise to new ideas and new ways of thinking and new ways of surviving. And I think that, like, you know, all of these artists, you know, actually Dedrick was really, really lucky. Dedrick, they had their studio most of the time during the pandemic, but it was kind of, you know, it really was a wonderful outlet for him, because I remember he was like, oh my God, I get to meet with you again this week. You know, it was like that kind of moment where it was like, oh, I have something to look forward to. So then there was that part of it. Yeah.
You know, Jonathan, we posted some information on the museum's website. So there's kind of a long introduction that I wrote, and also something that Chase wrote. And in that introduction, I sort of describe, I think, answer your question is certainly, Chase is correct. I think from my point of view, it never would have happened without the COVID-19 thing. It happened, you know, very organically, you know, because I just packed up and went home. I think March 16th, we closed the museum. And so now I'm working from home, and, you know, we started this experience with Zoom and all the virtual reality things. And, you know, I'm of a different generation. So getting up to speed with all that, and, you know, I taught my seminar class. We didn't use Zoom at the time, we used Skype. It was the same idea. So from March until the end of the semester, I was teaching, you know, if that's what you call it, trying to facilitate conversations, you know, in this format. And I get up in the morning and I walk around this pond to get some exercise that I have in a place. And that's where I think of these things go through my head. And I don't know, it was kind of kismet, because I'd had one of those walks and I kept thinking, what's a virtual reality exhibition? We all have to do things virtual. We have just some kind of exhibition of virtual. What's a virtual reality exhibition? Maybe the museum needs to do a virtual reality. And probably that same day or the next day, Chase happened to call me, because from time to time we talk. And it's always great because, you know, the ideas just sort of fire back and forth. So I said something to him in that conversation. What have you been doing? What have you been? Oh, this is what I've been doing. How are you doing? And what about, do you know anything about a virtual reality exhibition? What would you do if you did? And then it was just triggered, you know, by that. So it was the COVID thing. It was the the whole sense of my, kind of dealing with technology and becoming more flexible and more engaged by it all. And then the process, I think, it's just like where you have to take a risk, and risks are dicey for any of us in what we do, whether we're teaching or trying to run a museum or have something, you're gonna have to take a risk. This could be really bad. This could be interesting. This could not be interesting. What do you think of my work? I don't know. Maybe you should refire it. So all of those doubts are kind of what fuel, let's just do it. Let's just try it. Let's see what will happen with it. And maybe, that's always a notion about something will come out of it, even if it's a bomb, even if it's a failure, something will happen that we will come out on the other side and we'll have some other options. We'll know something and we'll be able to play knowing that information. So maybe that expands, in my mind, what the museum means or what it possibly could mean. That, it's a ceramic art museum, but we show work in all media. We can take these kinds of adventures through that sort of porthole of ceramic art and do whatever is possible to do. And that would maybe give us more permission to think about what is it we could do. So this doesn't have to be an end game, and it's not necessarily set up to be, but it is set up in a way to sort of say, what happens when you take that kind of risk? What does it mean? How can you collaborate with folks to get something going? I think this whole Zoom situation has caused us to do a kind of different sort of collaboration, but I've always loved the idea of collaboration. And so you need all of these folks. And then finally, we've got the designers at Private Screen, and we've got the artists, and we've got Chase. And that whole process became just really intriguing to me. And you work with this, Jonathan, a lot in your own work, with this idea of designing something, and then you have to collaborate, and something else has to happen. And you don't get back what you actually started with necessarily, in a different way than if you just, didn't get the thing out of the kiln the way you thought you would. So maybe there's an analogy to the way ceramic artists work within this whole spectrum of what we've been talking about, here's a problem, let's just take a risk and see what's gonna happen. Good question, thank you. Thank you for being here, Jonathan.
It looks like Matt Kelleher has a question.
I'd like to ask a question. Where is Matt?
Howdy.
Yeah.
Hey, Chase. Great to see you.
You too.
Say, yeah, I miss having you here.
Me too. I miss it.
There's something about, well, I have a few thoughts that this idea of like COVID hitting and losing studios, and I got bucked off that bull like week 1 and wasn't able to make work. I just couldn't get it together. And then your agility to move into this project is really impressive. You're always hungry and looking at people's work, all kinds of work, and you'd be a great gallery owner because you're always like genuinely like promoting other people's work. And I don't think that energy, that contribution, that generosity that you give should be overlooked. My question is, I hesitate to ask because it just falls into the category of, well, what have you done for me lately? But because you have this show going, but I'm so curious what else you've been daydreaming about from a curatorial point of view.
It's like one of those things that like you hope you have a really good idea tomorrow. You start this, and I'm not gonna lie, every single time I curate a show, I'm like, I'm not doing that for a long time. And the only reason why is because it's a lot. It's a lot of work, more than you could, when it's done. It's like it's like putting up a show and like installing it, and then you're just like, oh my God, I need to go home and go to bed, or I need to go home and have a drink. Like you're done. But as far as like ideas for curation, I have this really, okay, so I talked to this woman briefly. I was at a bar in Richmond before I left Richmond, and I talked to this woman who, she really is obsessed with Star Trek. And so in my own work, I've been working with lunar simulant, which is like fake moon dust. And I'm working with it as kind of like a new ceramic, and thinking about like if the moon were Earth, and like how would we, if there was no longer Earth, how would we kind of survive as artists, as makers, and as people who like to touch things and make things. And so that's been on my mind. I've been thinking so much about like other people who are thinking about materials outside of Earth. And like, what does that look like as, it's really hard to describe, like, how do you use materials that aren't of Earth to not talk about Earth? Well, our only choice is to use materials that are on Earth. So it's like, there's this kind of cyclical nature with that conversation, but I'm really interested in that kind of brain teaser. So I've been looking at a lot of painting. I look at painting a lot before even I curated the show. And so I'm kind of wanting to do a painting show maybe to start that conversation. But I don't know. I really don't. I don't know where that's going to take me. It's always really nice to do curation. I want to say taking a break from your studio, because it's not really a break. You're never really away from it. I mean, even if when you don't have it, you're always thinking about things to make. So I think that like for me, it's like a way to stay busy too, and to actually have conversations with artists that you've been wanting to have conversations with, those phone calls with people that it's going to take an hour when you call them. And so I feel like that's kind of also what curation feeds, as well as like it becomes those people that I've been wanting to talk to and figure out their work and do something with it. And yeah, good question. I have 2 solo shows opening next summer. So, well, one definitely, one is, it's in the works. So, but one at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design for sure. So, yeah.
What was the moon dust material?
Yeah, it's lunar simulant.
Lunar simulant, I like that part.
Yeah, it's really cool. I actually wanted to, I have this idea to create, well, I already bought the moon dust, so that's already in the bag. It costs a lot of money. It was like my last hurrah when I left VCU. It was like I had some money left in my employee account, and I just bought all of that material.
Moon dust. Oh.
Yeah, actually, I was actually on my way to the grocery store because Felix, my dog, kept throwing up. And I was trying to figure out a way to, and I looked online, and apparently like pumpkin, it was like pumpkin puree settles your stomach. But anyway, I say that because I was so desperate. And then on the drive there, I was like, wait a minute, I got to make that piece that I'm thinking about out of moon dust. So I looked up a moon rock while in the line at the Kroger grocery store buying that. And they're like $25 million for a rock. And I was like, well, that's out of the bag. And so then I get home, Felix is feeling better. And then I find this company that makes simulant for NASA. And I started buying it and playing with it. Actually, you can get like I think they'll send you a pound of it, but you have to be approved through this online portal. You submit like a proposal and all that stuff.
That's like trying to get a giraffe as a pet.
I like the moon dust better. It fits into the corner.
Okay. This has been terrific. Do I have any more closing questions? Otherwise, we'll...
Looks like Margot has a question.
Yeah, who has the last question? Margot.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
There you are. Hi, Margot.
Hi, Wayne. Hi, Chase. It's really nice to meet you. I'm a first-year graduate student. And so this question is for Chase. I wanted to ask you, it used to be like in your voracious nature to consume art and your passion around curation, it used to be that an online show or an online exhibition was sort of nothing to write home about. But I think we're all in a space where this could go on for some time or even become a new gateway or a new normal. So I'm wondering if you see this sort of virtual exhibition as being a new mainstay, or if you feel like it is, a phase. Just sort of any parting thoughts on that. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, that's a great question. God, I hope not. I actually think that like the online interface, like a computer, a phone screen, I don't want to say that works for painting and that works for photography, but it does help in terms of two-dimensional space. I think that's pretty obvious in its nature, but and actually I'm teaching a drawing class right now, and I really love it, but I just thought to myself, I was like, oh my God, to do this with ceramics, to do this with like something that I have to touch, right? Like you can't just watch me do it. You've got to feel yourself doing it, right? That's difficult. But in terms of like a gallery, or shows that are 3D work, to be honest, I don't like it. It's not real. It doesn't, I don't post my work on Instagram very often because of that, because I really want you to experience three-dimensional work in three-dimensional space. And it's really difficult to, especially as makers, as like people who love to make things with our hands, to then put something online and then all of a sudden we appreciate seeing those things. We appreciate when people can appreciate the feel of those things or the aesthetic of those things. And you get that by experiencing it with your body. It has that like bodily interaction. And so I don't know. I think that I don't want that. I don't like, I don't, if Nova Scotia called me and said, hey Chase, we're going to put your exhibition online, I would say no. I would say no, I'm not doing that. Because I do think things are going to get better. I do believe that, and I don't want to lose that hope. And in fact, I was actually in New York. I live about 45 minutes to an hour away from the city. And I went to New York, wore my mask. I drove into the city, got out of my car, literally parked in front of the gallery, walked in. I had an appointment. I was the only person in the gallery. They only do one person at a time. I saw the show. It was so amazing to see things in real life. And I think that's what sinks my stern reply, which is like, no, like, because I know it's possible. And I get so much joy of seeing things alive, just like you do. And I'm sorry, I don't want to assume, but I would assume most people, right? Like shopping online isn't as fun as shopping in real life, So it's kind of the same thing, I think, no, it's not the same thing, because with art, I don't necessarily have to buy it, but I can enjoy it and appreciate it. And I want to do that in person. And so, yeah, I hope not. And that's why, it's Margot, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so like, that's Margot. That's why when this VR exhibition came up, I was like, yes, I will do that. That sounds phenomenal, because VR, that's what it does. It's about creating a virtual space. It's about creating an experience that where you can make something new. So like, in my opinion, why would I want to see a sculpture that exists in real life in virtual space? Why don't we use virtual space as a way to create something new that we couldn't see in real life? The other way around.
Mhm.
So that's kind of why I was like, hell yeah, I'll do this. This is great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. I'm happy to hear that. I think it's fair to assume that most people engaged in ceramics are fairly tactile, in general, and would love to see that happen. So I'm happy to embrace your reply. But I think it's a really interesting dialogue. And like the way we're seeing advancements in like museums scanning objects and for view, the way you can for your Sackler, you can rotate an object and see it from all angles, and it certainly just, that expansive dialogue, continues. But I want to remain in a space where I make things that people hold in their hands and encourage that. So thank you so much for your reply.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you, Margo. That was a great question. And thank you, Chase.
Yeah.
You're always amazing. I would love this format. It's almost like a seminar at this point where we're talking to each other about these problems over this mechanism, this technology, but we're getting into ideas and trying to unpack them a little bit. It's great. It's very exciting for me. It's one of the things I really treasure about being able to do with students and friends, and I've enjoyed very much doing that with you with this virtual reality project. It's been quite interesting, and I've learned a tremendous amount. So anyway, thank you for your talk, and thanks everyone for being here with us, and stay tuned. We'll do something else sponsored by the museum that hopefully will float your boat. So good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Take care, guys. Thank you all so much. Bye.
This was great. Thank you.
Yeah.